today for the webinar. I would like to welcome our chief guest for today's session, Mr. P.K. Malhotra, sir. He is former Secretary, Ministry of Law and Justice. Mr. P.K. Malhotra has more than 40 years experience in the field of law in various capacities, out of which he has worked in the Ministry of Law and Justice for more than 25 years as an officer of Indian Legal Service and reached the apex level of Union Law Secretary. He was responsible for processing and finalizing many important legislations, including Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, Constitution amendments relating to National Judicial Appointment Commission, Companies Act 2013, Representation of People's Amendment Bill, Commercial Courts Act 2015, etc. As secretary in the legislative department, he was dealing with all matters relating to election laws, including references received from the Election Commission of India and litigation matters relating to election laws. Mr. P.K. Malhotra has held several key positions such as Secretary, Ministry of Law and Justice, Member, Law Commission of India, and Member, Securities Appellate Tribunal, etc. His significant foreign assignments include that of being the head of Indian delegation to Vienna and New York to participate in the meeting of UNCITRAL relating to arbitration, conciliation, and mediation. Mr. Malhotra represented India before WTO Dispute Resolution Panel in Geneva in dispute between India and European Union. Sir holds a master degree in political science along with an LLM diploma in international law. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and taking the time out. Welcome our keynote speaker, Advocate Mr. Kapil Sankla. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Sir is a member of Supreme Court Bar Association, Delhi High Court Bar Association, Delhi Bar Council, Saket Bar Council, and Indian Council of Arbitration. Sir is currently the managing partner of the firm Sankla and Associates. Sir has been in practice since 1999 and has been awarded the coveted Super Lawyer of the Year 2016. His experience covers a broad range of areas relating to dispute advisory, litigation and arbitration, corporate and commercial matters, white-collar crimes, employment, infrastructure, and aspects of public policy and administration, governance, and ethics. He has been listed as one of the leading lawyers in India in various publications from time to time. Thank you so much, sir, for having us. You are here with us today. Thank you so much. Sorry for the mistakes.
No, not at all. Please, it's such an honor. It's such a wonderful thing to actually be able to interact with you youngsters. I mean, I just tell everyone, if I was this confident when I was your age, I would have probably done much better than what I have done. But
thank you so much, sir.
It's such an honor to be in company of, the doyens of legal fraternity. I've been a personal fan of Justice Balakrishnan. I've had the good fortune of appearing before him in a number of matters. And, I don't even have to say anything about Mr. Malhotra, the former law secretary, somebody that we've always looked up to. And I've also had the good fortune of sharing space on various news channels with him, as recently, I think, last week.
Yeah.
Mr. D.K. Singh, of course, that I have very high regards for. I've had the good fortune of meeting. You're all experts in the field of law. I am your junior. And despite whatever 2 decades, I am nowhere close to you. So I will try to give whatever little knowledge that I have about this subject. First of all, thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you, Legal Joint, for this wonderful opportunity. It is wonderful to see you and organizations like yourself utilizing these period of lockdown to assimilate and dispense education and legal knowledge. I commend you for your efforts and your initiative, and I hope that organizations such as yours will be a beacon of light, of high knowledge for young as well as experienced lawyers alike all over India. Before I start, Juvenile, please.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Law Joint webinar on CBI investigation and trial proceeding. I welcome Mr. P.K. Malhotra, sir, former Law Secretary, Government of India, and Mr. Kapil Sankla, sir, Advocate Supreme Court of India, Without taking so much time, I request PK Malhotra sir to kindly inaugurate the session and say a few words. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr.
Sorry to
Rajendra Pal
disturb you,
Singh.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rajendra Pal Singh.
Thank you, sir.
Shri D.K. Singh, Advocate and Vice Chairman, Bar Council of Delhi. My dear friend, Shri Kapil Sankla ji, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Rajendra Pal Singh, founder of the Law Point, a comparatively young institution, and that is one of the reasons which I thought that I must participate and share my thoughts and listen to the views of the experts who are dealing with this particular subject in the profession. And I'm also given to understand that Justice K.G. Balakrishnan ji, former Chief Justice of India, will also be joining us shortly. Distinguished participants in today's webinar, and my dear students who are very, very dear to me, and I think who are an important part of this webinar because they are the future of our country. I welcome you all to this webinar being organized by Law Joint. And Rajendra Pal Singh has been in touch with me for quite some time. And in one or two occasions in the past also, I got an opportunity to participate in some of the webinars organized under his leadership. And I tell you, I mean, the kind of responses which I used to get, that was one of the reasons that I couldn't say no to him when he said that on a Sunday evening, he is organizing a webinar. And the topic was also of interest because of the recent development in one of the important cases which are taking place. And every day it is being covered by the news channel. I'm talking about the case of the film actor, in which the Supreme Court also, in the case of Rhea Chakravarti, has given certain directions. Of course, there are experts who will be talking on this particular topic, but I just want to make general remarks. Before I come to the topic of the day, we all of know that the world is passing through a difficult phase, and COVID-19 pandemic has brought everything to a standstill for some time. However, life must go on. Therefore, the changes which are taking place, and I'm reminded of the first observation made by the Prime Minister when lockdown was declared. He said, "Jaan hai to jahan hai," meaning there should be total lockdown. But after we have prepared ourselves to deal with the situation, and our medical and other paramedical forces and other people who are in the front of dealing with the COVID, they were ready. Then the Prime Minister said, "Jaan bhi, jahan bhi." I think that was an important change which was brought. And under that changed scenario, we find that the COVID-19 has opened many new opportunities in the work culture. Now, holding of courts through video conferencing probably could not have come in the normal course at such a short notice. I think credit for this goes to, of course, we have problems with regard to COVID-19 and pandemic, but the credit for holding courts through video conferencing, I think fully goes to COVID-19. Secondly, work from home culture, which was an exception, has now almost become a rule. And holding of webinar instead of seminars are some of the developments which have taken place now in the recent past. And continuing education online is another development. And this webinar is also part of that particular event. Now, connecting us through this webinar from the comfort of our home or office is a new culture. And I know that it is going to continue for some time to come till the situation improves, in spite of the technical glitches which we may face sometime, and because of the digital divide also which it has created in the society. But I think in the time to come, all this will be taken care of. And my advice to all the participants here is, of course, it is being said by everybody, even by people from the medical profession, our leader also, stay safe, take care of your health, maintain distance, use mask when you are going out, and keep on doing sanitization wherever necessary when you go out. Now, with this precaution, which I said that because we are through a webinar, so we need not use our mask because all of us are working from our home. But yes, if we are going for a webinar, which is in normal course, I think we must take all those precautions. Now, coming to today's topic, I think this is a very, very important topic. And we have very distinguished two speakers who will be speaking on this topic. And I would just like to make some opening remarks. And talking about the CBI investigation or trial proceeding, the first question which arises is, why this topic? Is the CBI investigation and trial proceeding different from other trials which are conducted by the state police? I mean, if one has to say in one word, the answer is no, because CBI is also a police organization, but it is a police organization of the central government. And so far as the trial proceedings are concerned, they are conducted as per the same law which is applicable in all other state governments. But in spite of that, saying that CBI investigation and trial is the same as is conducted by the states, I think then probably we are undermining the importance or the position of the CBI which it has acquired today. Now, as all of us know, the law and order is a police, law and order and police are state subject, and generally speaking, center has no direct role in day-to-day enforcement of law and routine crimes committed by these states. But when we are talking about the CBI as a special investigation agency, I think we must understand that how it came into existence. Now, of course, as I said, the expert panelists will be speaking on it, but just a few words which I would say about this organization is that it was constituted in 1941 after World War II under the Ministry of Defense to deal with the large number of supplies made and the corruptions which was taking place in the supply chain. To deal with this kind of cases, in 41 it was constituted, and it got legal recognition by an act of 1946, which we all of us know is a Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. And its initial jurisdiction was to deal with corruption cases, and later on it was extended not only to the center, but to the states, but only restricted to the offices which are under the control of the central government. Take, for example, there are a large number of central public sector undertakings which are spread throughout the length and breadth of the country. Then in 1969, when the banks were nationalized, all those banks also became the central public sector undertaking. So to deal with all these cases, you needed a central agency, and this agency was given power to deal with all such cases of investigation and trial also. And slowly in the process, we constituted special courts also to deal with the CBI matters. Now, in addition, I'm making reference to Section 5 and Section 6, because by consent of the state government, even with respect to the matter which fall within the domain of the state government, can also be entrusted to the CBI for investigation. In addition, we have recently seen that the case of Riya Chakrabarti or Sushant Singh has also been given to the CBI by the Supreme Court of India. So as per the law laid down, the Supreme Court as well as the high courts, which are courts of record, can also hand over matters to the CBI for proper investigation. Now the question arises, why CBI? Why not state police? And I think that's a very important question. Once law and order is a state subject and state is doing it, and state is responsible for maintaining law and order as well as prosecution of cases, why you need a special agency? When a case is special, probably it needs to be given a special treatment. Probably it is fine that probably in the states, generally the political parties try to influence the police authorities because they have direct administrative control on the police department also. So this is one reason whereby the confidence of the common man gets shaken when it comes to a very, very important matter pertaining to the economy of the country, pertaining to the corruption cases, or very important political cases. Now, therefore, the CBI has been constituted as a special body, and it enjoys a special status and has been given a special treatment because the kind of facilities for investigation and trial of cases which are available with CBI are not available with the states, maybe because of resource crunch, or because of more autonomy, functional autonomy, which has been given to the CBI. Now, some of the important points which I would like to highlight, of course, the distinguished panelists will be speaking about it, are that professionalism in the CBI in handling cases is much better as compared to the professionalism which is enjoyed by the state authorities. Secondly, the CBI has a multi-layered supervision on investigation of cases, and it has got a separate investigation wing, and separate prosecution wing. And in addition to that, when cases are tried in the special CBI courts, there are independent PERVI officer to ensure that the case takes progress in accordance with the norms laid down under the law. The officers of the CBI, they come from state's police cadre on deputation, and they are not influenced by the state authorities or the political body. It has got its own training center, which is in Ghaziabad, which is a state-of-the-art center, and anybody who is given investigation, he is first given a 6-month training in the CBI Training Institute in Ghaziabad before he can start investigation of the cases. And in addition to that, so far as the investigating officers are concerned or the prosecutors are concerned, the CBI has got its own internal surveillance mechanism, which brings the CBI on a higher pedestal insofar as investigation and prosecution is concerned. So all other procedures as laid down in the Evidence Act, CRPC are followed by CBI, but because of the status given to it, and because of the infrastructure and the facilities which are available to it, and because of the autonomy given to the officers in handling these cases, the CBI enjoys a better confidence among the masses when it comes to trial of cases. And the number of cases which CBI has to handle is much less as compared to the number of cases which state police have to handle. Therefore, they can devote more time on its investigation. Now, in spite of all this, there have been cases, there have been issues when CBI has also failed to dispose of the cases or come to the final conclusion or help in trial of the matter expeditiously, because many a time either the cases are given to the CBI at so late that either the evidence itself has been destroyed, or probably the kind of cooperation which you needed from the witnesses, that is not forthcoming. So I think there are certain issues with regard to functioning of the CBI also, but by and large, functioning of the CBI is much better as compared to the functioning of the state police, and therefore, I think people have got more confidence in the functioning of the CBI. Based on this, you may be knowing that even the central government have constituted a separate agency in the center, which is known as National Investigating Agency, which deal with the crime relating to terrorism in the country. It's a specialized agency, again, created by the central government. Of course, I remember when this law was being made, there was a debate in the parliament, there was a debate in the public domain that why there should be a separate central agency in the central government to deal with cases relating to terrorism. Now, because the terrorism affects the nation as a whole, it doesn't affect a particular state. So therefore, during the power from the international conventions and the law which we have, probably this kind of power was given, and another central agency was created for trial of cases more particularly relating to terrorism. Now, I don't want to take much time, because I know if I take more time, I will be encroaching upon the time of the distinguished speakers who will be going into the greater detail of it. Thank you very much to Law Point for inviting me and chairing this particular session. I would definitely like to hear the views of the two distinguished panelists who will be speaking on the subject, and then I'm open to answer any of the questions which will be asked by the participants, along with the responses which we may get from the two distinguished panelists.
Sankla sir, sorry to disturb you, sir, that time.
No, not at all. In fact,
Now you can start the session, sir.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure. Thank you. And I'm very sorry. It reminds me, in 2000, I was doing a CBI trial, very, very big. It was all over the papers. And now Justice Bharyok was then the special CBI judge. And I remember I was a very young lawyer, and I would start off even before the CBI prosecution would start their argument. And I would always get a scolding. So I came up with a strategy. I would start my argument to say, my lord, everything against me that CBI can argue is this, and now I want to meet it. That was the only way not to get scolding of the court. I think I still haven't learned my lesson.
Thank you.
But such a pleasure hearing Mr. Malhotra. It's always a pleasure to.
On the lighter side of it, old habits die hard.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. That is why I said still haven't learned my lesson.
No.
But okay. But to come back to the matter at hand, before I talk about CBI trial, there is something that I wanted to share with you about criminal law system, and something that is extremely close to me. We all understand that criminal law is fast evolving. There are various groups, organizations, associations. Many of them, unfortunately, because of their theoretical knowledge, are pandering to public perception that delay in criminal trial is a result of defense's dilatory tactic. And this is more so in CBI matters, unfortunately. There are also various pressure groups that I see nowadays with these white papers, etc., being written, asking for seriously curtailing the right of the defense as a misguided strategy to otherwise higher purpose of speeding up the criminal trial. In my humble opinion, both these strategies are misfounded, and they are dangerous incursion upon the democratic and constitutional right of the common man. You see, I honestly believe that time-bound trial is a wonderful way to ensure that criminal trial is concluded within a reasonable period of time. And the PC Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act 2018, seriously meets with this. But it doesn't encroach on the right of the defense. But in cases, we have to understand where the prosecution is not bound by time, while the defense is fettered by limited time granted by the court to conclude its defense evidence. And where, it is rightly that court cannot direct the investigating agency to investigate the matter in a particular way or manner. But the investigating officer is not duty bound to disclose the complete evidences that has come to his knowledge and possession, and allowing him to file only those documents which, in his view, are relevant to the case or takes his case forward, are, I think, serious breaches that we have to meet. Because if the court had the advantage of going through those documents in the charge sheet, many matters would get discharged and would not waste the precious time of the court. Because at the end of the day, when you consider what is the meaning of taking cognizance of a matter, means the court is applying its mind for the first time in a matter. And the court does not have the advantage of going through the entire set of documents or the entire set of evidence. That evidence that can show, unimpeachable evidence that can show that the accused is innocent or that there is some other theory in the case. And the IO not being duty bound to disclose that document, in my personal opinion, as a defense lawyer, is unfair, not only to the defense, but I think also to the court. Then, of course, there are issues that we are now facing where Section 91 CRPC, wherein the IO can issue summons to produce document or other things, is used to curtail the right of the accused under Article 21, Subclause 3, the right of silence, golden principle that the accused cannot be made a witness against himself. And I hope that, the important stakeholders, the real stakeholders of criminal judicial system, the defense lawyers here, the distinguished guests, people who deal with these issues day in and day out, somehow stand up to this, would speak up, would get these vital issues to the knowledge of the ears of the powers that be. It is my hope and endeavor that this organization, its members, its participants, everyone today will take up these relevant issues and independently or collectively help towards getting better laws, fairer laws, laws which are truly representing our democratic processes and our constitutional rights. We've handled, I don't know how many CBI matters over the years, and matters which have been in media trial. And there is something very common that I've noticed that a defense lawyer should do. He should give up the joy of being an aggressive lawyer if you ever want to be on the defense side. Because you see, when you handle a matter that's being also parallelly being handled in media where the public perception is against you, you will only cement the court's perception that your client is a powerful man, that your client has done something wrong. And that prima facie view that the human side of the judge would be against you, and you don't want that. So when you're in the court, when you're handling these matters, and most of the CBI matters are also matters which are being parallelly handled in the media, also suffering media trial. you should imagine, as I do, imagine myself to be like water, focused, trying to cut the rock, water, focused, with tenacious resolve, always prepared to meander into a domain that the judge asks. So being very, very sure about your case, being very, very prepared about the facts of your case, so that you're never at loss to an answer. And I think if you have all of that, then the first step to being a defense lawyer on the criminal side, handling either matters pertaining to CBI trial or matters pertaining to in media trial, is something that you can easily handle. Mr. Malhotra has rightly given a brief overview of what is the similarity and difference between CBI and state police, but I'll just meet it once again. Like CBI is just like any other investigating agency. It is bound by CRPC, where it investigates matters pertaining to IPC, and in special statutes where the investigation or trial follows CRPC. But the difference between CBI and local police is also substantial. Where police is a state subject, the CBI answers to the center. And therefore that part that distinguishes the state's powers as state subject as per constitution does not affect the CBI being a creature of the act which has come subsequent. CBI answers to the center. It has powers and functions all over India because of the act under which it operates. It handles matters under special statutes. For example, the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is one of the major functions of CBI. That was the original function by CBI, was incorporated in the first place. And the punishment that may be followed or the trial that may be followed would be under the special statute, unless until the common statute or the general statute or CRPC, either in totality or in part, is taken into consideration. CBI is much better equipped. So therefore, any matter pertaining to CBI, there's a higher chance of forensic and latest scientific technologies being used. CFSL is a part of CBI, and so in the hierarchy of things, CFSL would always give priority to any request made by CBI, NIA, or the courts. It will also answer to a request by state police and other investigating units, but in the hierarchy of things, those would be lower. So therefore, CBI has the advantage of CFSL, and therefore, as I said, forensic science is something that you will have to delve with much higher. In, for example, when we are talking about Sushant Singh case, there are a lot of issues that CBI is working on. It would be on medical jurisprudence. So therefore, any person who's interested in the matter, I would strongly suggest to buy medical jurisprudence Modi and read it, because various issues pertaining to the dead body, how the same would fall, what would be the mark, ligature marks, etc., are all going to be met by CBI, and that is something very, very important. The one important difference with CBI, and which is very, very important, is that CBI, as I said, works under the central government, reports to the Prime Minister. State police works under state government, reports to the Chief Minister. Tenure of CBI director, now this is something which is creature of our courts, is fixed, and he cannot be removed anytime unless the government of India permits. But the state police is, the chief is at the whims and fancies of the state powers. Before we discuss the trial power issues pertaining to trial, let us understand the general law. And Mr. Singh, at any time, just give me 5 minutes heads up so that I can conclude. It will be much better.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So the basic trial, which is common when it comes to CBI or ACP, which is anti-corruption branch, which is the state unit for corruption, or state police, is very, very common. It's all a part of CBI. It's all a part of CRPC. We will meet the differences. We all know, and you know, this is very basic knowledge, that the offenses under CRPC are divided in cognizable as non-cognizable offenses, defined under 2C and 2L of CRPC. We are concerned with the cognizable offenses where the police can investigate and arrest without a warrant or without the permission of the court. Now, arrest can happen only after the police registers an FIR under 154. There has been a lot of, and I'm actually meeting this because of the Sushant Singh controversy, and something that I have had the good fortune of meeting and dealing with at various forums. There has been a lot of controversy and contradictory opinion about the powers of the police to investigate or inquire the matter without the registration of an FIR. The Maharashtra police and the Maharashtra government sought to argue in Supreme Court that the power of inquiry, of investigation. So inquiry and investigation, which is very important, without registration of FIR on mere information is valid and allowed. So for those who have already heard my opinion, because I already got a number of calls on this, and for those who haven't, my personal opinion as a lawyer is that CRPC has to be read consistently from top to bottom. It cannot be read upside down. And therefore, the sections themselves, in my opinion, are guiding principles on how the procedure will be followed by the police. So an FIR, as we all know, is registered under 154 CRPC. Whenever an information is received, it will be, the report will be put in a register, the first information report, as the name suggests. The investigation thereafter is under 156 CRPC. So one, in my opinion, and of course, the statement of witnesses would be recorded under section 161 CRPC. So in my opinion, this actually rests the issue, whether pertaining to Sushant Singh case or any other case, that the police can only investigate the matter once the FIR is registered and not before. In my understanding, the Honorable Supreme Court in its judgment has also substantially opined such. Another question that is usually asked, and that also comes up during arguments, especially that came up during Sushant Singh case, is the power of the police to inquire into a matter. So basically a wedge has been sought to be created saying that investigation may be required. For investigation, FIR may be required, but for inquiry, no FIR is required. And I've heard some some lawyers also seconding this opinion. Probably an impression is being sought to be given that the power of the police to investigate the matter may emanate after registration of FIR, but the power of the police to inquire or make inquiry, because the requirement to register an FIR is something which is valid and permitted. Again, this is my personal opinion, that although the police has unfettered powers to investigate the matter, the power of conducting inquiry is only with the judiciary and not with the police. And I'll tell you why. Because the power to make an inquiry has been given under section 159, section 174 and 176 CRPC. But you will notice that 159, these pertain to cognizable offenses and not to non-cognizable offenses. One. The second is that they pertain to the powers of the magistrate. And in cases of suicide, which is what 174 is all about, in my opinion, and this is what the Maharashtra police was rallying in its argument, 174, the power of inquiry, I think, is an additional requirement in cases of suicide that runs parallel to registration of FIR and cannot be disconnected. So therefore, in case where there is a suicide that has been committed, there is an inquiry under 174 that the police has to do parallelly with its investigation under IPC 154, 156, as I've already stated. So this is my personal opinion. We will meet it once again, but one more thing that is very different in CBI is something which young lawyers, and I remember a lawyer who was briefing me was inquiring, and therefore, and when an FIR is registered, the number of the FIR is FIR number dash year, and thereafter the number, then thereafter the police station. Now CBI does not have various police stations. So what does it have? Its number starts as SIU and then the Roman number. So the SIU is Special Investigation Unit, a unit of CBI, and the number would be 2, 3, 4, depending whatever it is. The Special Investigation Unit, SIU, is the special number, and you will always know it is a CBI matter when I see the FIR number or the name of the complaint being number of the complaint starting as SIU. We will also deal with certain abbreviations if we have time. In a number of judgments, the Honorable Supreme Court, and this is again something with CBI and with special cases that I've seen, the Honorable Supreme Court in a number of judgments has stated that the copy of the FIR has to be given to the accused, and non-giving the same is violative of Article 21. But practically it has been noticed that in many cases where the accused is already in custody, where these are offenses against women or cases which are in limelight, etc., the police, as matter of principle, refuses to give copies to the family members of the accused or to the accused themselves. It is unfortunate that when the same is pointed out in the trial court, especially when lawyers file bail, seldom any action is taken against the erring police officers. And I really hope today by this forum that, in my opinion, if the trial courts take some action, after all, the Honorable Supreme Court has said that non-supply of the FIR is contempt of the court, it would go a long way in weeding out corruption. Because you know that when you move a bail, you have to have a copy of the FIR. So you do whatever it is to get the copy of the FIR. And I think it is unfair that the accused does not have the right to get an FIR, copy of the FIR in these cases. Very quickly again, a statement which is recorded by the investigating officer of the witnesses under 161 CRPC. It cannot be written in the handwriting of the witness. The accused cannot be made to make a statement under 161. There can be no signatures of the accused, of the witnesses in a statement under 161. This finds mentioned in 162 CRPC, nor any inducement can be offered under 163 CRPC for recording that statement. This would be very, very important in CBI cases, especially. And as I said, the accused cannot be made to give a statement under 161. There's a landmark judgment, Nandini Satpathy judgment. I think most of you would have read it in college. For those who haven't, 1978, Volume 2, SCC 424. The Honorable Supreme Court said that a person cannot be made a witness against himself. This also brings me back to the issue of Section 91 CRPC that I was just saying, that in today's era, what an IO usually does, and especially CBI, what it does, it sends a notice under 91 to the accused, asks him to join investigation and supply certain documents. Under 164 CRPC mandates that the accused has to be brought before the magistrate within 24 hours of arrest, and the police remand cannot go on for more than 15 days. It can be either in piecemeal manner or in total period. Thereafter, the accused will be in judicial custody. 173 mandates that the charge sheet has to be filed within 60 days of registration of FIR in all cases, exception being cases with 10 years and above, death cases or heinous offenses where the limitation is 90 days. If the accused is still in custody, he would be entitled to bail, which is called compulsory bail. And here is something which is one of the darkest chapters of CRPC, as I was saying, that when the charge sheet is filed, there is no mandatory requirement for the IO to give the entire evidence that he has collected, the entire evidence even which protects or saves the accused. He is only duty bound to file that document that in his opinion takes his case forward. I sincerely wish that something could be changed, because when we're talking about CBI, which is one of the premier investigating agencies of India, we cannot take them to be like the opposite party who will create a case under any circumstances against you, and that the prosecutor will also be a persecutor against you. After all, there are chances of discharge, and CBI matters goes on for years, though the PC Act has substantially now curtailed the time which is taken. Coming to CBI, as rightly said, that it was established in 1963, it drew its power from the Special Police Force. It was brought under the Ministry of Home Affairs, or the Home Ministry. In 1943, a special police force was constituted. It was under the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act of 1946. And its current avatar is what is known as CBI. There is a resolution of 1963, which under the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, thereafter set up CBI. CBI originally had 6 divisions. One was, of course, the Investigation and Anti-Corruption Division, which was under the Delhi Special Police Establishment, the Act, where, as rightly said by Mr. Malhotra, the whole purpose was to catch people committing bribery, corruption, etc. after World War II. Then there was a Technical Division under which various other subdivisions were created, including the section that educates and trains officers. There was a Crime Records and Statistics Division. There was a Research Division, Legal and General Division, and an Administration Division. In 2001, there was a 7th division added, and there was a restructuring. First became the Anti-Corruption Division, and then became the Economic Offences Division, which was dehorsed anti-corruption, but took care of larger issues, the scams, as you and I know. Then came the Special Crimes Division, that of course took cases which pertained to terrorism, hawala, various other issues, etc. Then there was a Directorate of Prosecution, Administrative Decision, Policy and Coordination, and Central Forensic Science Laboratory. 2 very important takeaways. In India, the investigating unit is disconnected from the prosecuting agency. So in most of the cases, the prosecutor, the public prosecutor, only gets to know what the case is when the charge sheet is filed, or usually before that, unless and until it is a big case and the opinion of the prosecutor is taken before the charge sheet is filed. Now, the disadvantage here is that the IO is not answerable to anyone till the time the charge sheet is filed, and then the charge sheet is tested. in case where the prosecution division is connected with the investigating agency, there would be stronger chances of matters being settled. The issues pertaining to pleading guilty, the prosecutor giving a negative opinion or making a stronger case, or making sure that weaker evidence or evidences which have been created at times by the investigating officer are not put forth. CFSL is a very, very important part of CBI now. It is an important, very important evidence in the criminal justice system for successful administration of justice. It is being used not only by CBI, but as I said, by NIA and other organizations as well. There is a long need. The only problem with CFSL is that it is not bound by time to file its report. Now, two things happen. One, the matters take place, the investigation itself takes place years because CFSL hasn't filed its report. And since the IO is duty bound to file the charge sheet within 60 or 90 days, he is then entitled to file a supplementary charge sheet whenever CFSL files a report. Now, what would happen is either argument on charge will not take place till the time the supplementary charge sheet is not filed, or argument or charge will take place, dehorse the report. And which is a serious lacuna in our criminal jurisprudence, in our criminal system. I think there is a strong need for judiciary and investigating agencies to be aware of the general procedures, the issues pertaining to pendency in forensic labs, and the pileup of cases and under trials languishing in jail just because CFSL hasn't filed its report. Now, CFSL handles various divisions. There is, of course, an anti-corruption division. There is economic offences division. There is special crime division. And the kind of functions are, of course, investigation of cases related to corruption, scams, misbehavior of central government officials, investigation of serious crimes having national, international ramifications, and maintaining crime statistics. Now, a question that is usually asked, especially being asked in Sushant Singh case again, was how are matters referred to CBI? Now, CBI can take over investigation of a criminal case registered by state police in following situations. This is dehorse CBI's original powers of being able to take care of investigation on its own, but there are various checks on CBI for that. So there we are talking about matters that it takes from state police would be one. The concerned state government makes a request. The request is made to the central government. The central government agrees to it. The central government usually takes an opinion or comment from CBI before giving that consent. The state government can issue a notification of consent under Section 6 of DSPE Act, and the central government issues notification under Section 5 of DSPE Act. This is what was argued on the issue of whether CBI has powers or not. And this has been argued in Guwahati High Court, in Assam High Court. In fact, there's a very interesting judgment of the Guwahati High Court that has challenged the very existence of CBI. The matter was subsequently stayed by the Honorable Supreme Court. But it is a wonderful judgment to read for people who are interested in doing these matters, because this goes to the very root of existence of CBI and where CBI's powers emanate from. After which, very important, the Supreme Court or the Honorable High Court can in any matter order a CBI inquiry. That is a completely independent power of the Honorable Supreme Court or of the High Court. The trial court does not have that power. But the trial court can refer a matter and then it can be taken up. CBI cannot suo motu take up investigation, as I've already stated, except in union territories, it being a central subject, except in union territories, but only under Section 2 of the DSP Act, in offences which are notified under Section 3 of the DSP Act. So something that you can read. As I've already stated, for CBI to take investigation of a matter which is in a state requires prior consent of the state as per Section 6 of the Act, and a central government can of course authorize CBI to investigate, but only with consent of the state government, where the consents have been given, which is a very general, it's like a general power of attorney that has been given. The existence of CVC is very important in any matter where CBI is involved, and the existence of DOPT is also very important. So in most of the matters that we do under Prevention of Corruption Act, there's a lot of argument about sanction, whether the sanction has been rightly given, whether the sanction was refused, and under what circumstances was sanction given again. CBI has hotly contested the role of CVC as an agency having power of supervision and superintendence. It is settled that CVC shall be responsible to oversee the functions of CBI in order to ensure its efficient functioning, while the government will be responsible for overviewing CBI and keeping an eye on it with respect to its mechanism to ensure impartial working. So CVC is responsible to review the progress of all pending cases moved by CBI for sanction or prosecution of public servants, especially in those cases where there has been some delay. Now, the Honorable Supreme Court has, of course, given guidelines. Those have been substantially met in the 2018 amendment as well. But coming back, the central government takes all measures necessary to ensure that CBI functions effectively. Thus, just for us to understand, the power of superintendence of CBI related to investigation of offences under the Prevention of Corruption Act lies with CVC. And in other matters, it lies with DOPT, Department of Personnel and Training in the Ministry of Personnel, Pension, Grievance of the Government of India. This is a ballpark idea for you to understand. Before we start talking about PC Act, it is also important to have a brief overview of anti-corruption laws in India. And when you talk about the CBI matters, even those matters which are under PC Act would have sections of IPC always in it. So one would be, of course, Indian Penal Code, section 161 to 165A, which deal with corruption. The Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, as we just said, which is now created an organization that we all know as CBI. The Benami Transaction Prohibition Act 1988, Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, Whistleblower Protection Act 2014, Black Money Act of 2015, and the star that we were talking about, Prevention of Corruption Act, came in force in 1947. And you can see the link. The Delhi Special Police Establishment Act came in 1946. The Prevention of Corruption Act came year thereafter in 1947. It was modified in 1988, is something that you and I deal with every day. There was an amendment to it in 2013. It came under major overhaul in 2018, is something that we will deal with. A question that has been asked in some other forum was that if a matter is going on in 1988 pertaining to Prevention of Corruption Act, and now 2018 has come in pertaining to section 13 pari passu in both, what would be the effect of a matter in which is going on in 1988? In my understanding, since there is no protective clause, probably 2018 will prevail upon 1988, but there is no judgment to it. And of course, I am saying it from a defense lawyer's perspective. I'm very sure the Honorable Supreme Court will be meeting it anytime soon. Key changes for any lawyer handling matters under PC Act. It is essential to know the difference between the 1988 Act and the amendment in the 2018 Act. We know that in the 1988 Act, which is common, the central state government is empowered to appoint special judges. So these matters which are handled by CBI, especially pertaining to PC Act, are handled by CBI judges specially appointed for this purpose. And unfortunately, the whole idea was that these courts will only do matters pertaining to CBI. Now they are also doing other matters, and therefore there is substantial delay. So the whole purpose of appointing special judges, unfortunately, kind of has got watered down over the years. Any offense punishable under this act, any conspiracy to commit or attempt to commit any abetment of any offenses specified under this act, the special judge would have all the powers exercised by a district judge under the Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance. The punishments are all there. We will not go into that. But the investigation is an important thing. Investigation, there is a hierarchy that has been created. In case of Delhi, it will be done by the Inspector of Police. In metropolitan areas, it will be Assistant Commissioner of Police. Elsewhere, it will be done by the Deputy Superintendent of Police or an officer equivalent rank. In 2013 amendment, giving bribe was made punishable offense. Now, interestingly, prior to that, this thing was not dealt into. Now, giving a bribe was also made a punishable offense. Person who is compelled to give bribe has to report the matter to the law enforcement authority within 7 days. And if he does that, he would not be charged with the offense. I will briefly deal with this later when it comes to two types of trap, where one trap where the complainant is saved because he has made the complaint, or the bribe giver is saved, and in the other, the bribe giver is also made an accused. The criminal misconduct was amended to cover two types of offenses: illicit enrichment and fraudulent misappropriation of property. It was made mandatory for taking prior approval of relevant government or competent authority. The trial timeline was fixed within a period of 2 years to be handled by a special judge, not exceeding 4 years. The 2018 amendments are very important. Giving bribe is now a specific and direct offense. Those convicted of taking bribes can be imprisonment, can suffer imprisonment for 3 to 7 years beside being fined. Bribe givers have also been included in the legislation for the first time. They can be punished with imprisonment up to 7 years or a fine or both. It makes provision for protection to coerced bribe givers if the matter is reported to the concerned law officer within a week. It redefines, and this is very important, criminal misconduct, and will now only cover misappropriation of property and possession of disproportionate assets. And importantly, it has made it mandatory for investigating agencies such as CBI to take prior approval from competent authority before conducting an inquiry against them. Such permission, however, will not be necessary for cases involving arrest of a person on the spot on charge of accepting or attempting to accept any undue advantage for himself or any other person. And undue advantage is also a term that has been elaborated in this case. It is not just financial remuneration, but a lot of host of other things. It covers bribe giving commercial organizations for the first time. Charitable organizations have been left out of its ambit, which is a strange thing. I'm sure the Honorable Supreme Court and the courts will of course look into this. It provides for powers and procedures for amendment and forfeiture of corruption accused public servants' property. This is something which is again an amendment. 2018, various highlights which are important for us to know is that the term prescribed has been introduced to mean rules that may be drafted by the central government. The term undue advantage has been defined to mean any gratification other than legal remuneration. The term gratification has been clarified to include all forms of gratification, estimable in money besides pecuniary gratification. This probably has been kept in mind, keeping in view expensive gifts, child education, business class tickets, as well as sexual favors to, honey sweeten a deal. The term legal remuneration has been clarified to include all remuneration a public servant is permitted to receive by the concerned authority. And the meaning of the term gratification and public remuneration were previously contained in explanation 7 prior to amendment. Now they are dealt completely separately. Section 7.
Sir, excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Honorable Justice K.G. Balakrishnan has joined us. I request P.K. Malhotra sir to please welcome the Honorable Justice K.G. Balakrishnan.
Of course.
Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure to have you in this webinar on CBI investigation and trial proceedings. Sir, you have always been our guide and mentor in all these seminars and webinars which are being conducted, and your word of wisdom are always a guiding force for the young lawyers as well as the students who are the lawyers of tomorrow. Sir, I welcome you to this webinar.
Thank you.
I know, sir, you have been busy in some other assignment, but still you could spare time and join us. We welcome you, and we have the pleasure of having you here. And we will be hearing your view after the panelists have spoken, sir. And you will be looking for your words of wisdom after the panelists have spoken on the topic.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now you can start, sir. Sorry.
Before I say anything, I would just like to thank my Lord. It's been an honor to actually share space with you, my Lord. I've had the good fortune of appearing before you, and you've been one of the smiling judges, if I may say so, a very kind-hearted judge.
Yes.
And, to be able to be, participating in this webinar today in your grace today for me is probably one of the highlights of my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sankla sir, you can start.
We have one more speaker. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, DK Singh sir has some meeting.
Say that I am disheartened. I'll be very honest. All right. So as we were dealing with the differences and the amendments in 2018, now there has been time extension under section 4, subsection 4. Now the courts have to complete the trial for offences under this act within a period of 2 years. Failing which, the court will have to record the reasons for extension. An extension can be extended only by 6 months to a maximum period of 4 years, which actually keeps the ball rolling as far as the matters are concerned. Again, as I said, my only hope is and wishes that it does not curtail into the right of the defense. Section 7 has been now substituted with a new section, which has made the definition of offense wider, which now includes all aspects of passive bribery, including solicitation of bribe, acceptance to intermediaries, etc. A question that would probably be met eventually by judiciary would be, what happens in cases where an intermediary or a dalal or a person who claims to represent a public officer or public servant says that he can arrange for something and get something done, but there is absolutely no disconnect and the poor public servant has no idea. So this is something that would be met by the honorable courts. However, my understanding is that in prior matters, where, as I said, that there are two kinds of traps. In certain kinds of traps, what the CBI does is that in cases there is an intermediary which sees the movement of the file to see whether the statement made by the intermediary and the movement of the file has something in common, and therefore creates a link between these two situations. The second thing which is there is under section 8. Section 8 has also been substituted, which makes any promise, offering or giving of any undue advantage to a public official to refrain from acting in exercise of his powers a criminal offense. It prescribes punishment for persons abetting a bribe or attempting to indulge in corruption with a public servant. The amendment exempts those acts committed out of compulsion, provided a person so compelled files a complaint with the police or the investigating agency within 7 days of giving a bribe under compulsion. So this is a huge step which has come in, which would be argued by defense lawyers in times to come. Section 9 and 10 are also very, very important. And this probably is one of the major changes that have been brought in. 9 and 10 have been substituted to cover commercial organizations and persons in charge of such commercial organizations within the ambit of PC Act. The term commercial organization is clarified to include all forms of business structures, and the phase has been enlarged to companies, partnerships, firms, etc., etc., etc. As I've said, that there is one disconnect as far as charitable organizations is concerned, but I'm sure that that would be met in the times to come. Section 10 now imposes specific term for imprisonment and a fine where commercial organizations, directors, officers in default, or a person with control over the organization has consented to corrupt act violating the provisions of the act. It is important to note that when the amendment to section 10 and section 9, because this has to be read together, the amended act seems to penalize both commercial organizations at one side for violation of the act by levying a fine, and the officers in charge of such commercial organizations under section 10 for criminal liability. This is important because over the years in company acts and various other cases, the issue of criminal liability of a company was being argued, and this act seems to meet it specifically. Now, to go further, chapter 4A is something which has now been inserted, which now specifically provides for confiscation of bribe and proceeds of bribery. You see, as defense lawyers, what was also being argued, though the Honorable Supreme Court in various judgments subsequently stuck that argument out, was that if the bribe is, for example, 20 lakh or 30 lakh or whatever, if a person deposits that money, the ill-gotten property which he's purchased, he may be permitted to sell the same. So there were judgments on both sides to this argument. This particularly kind of takes away that argument on the defense side. The amended act has streamlined instances where public servant can be accused of alleged criminal misconduct. this is again very, very important. The amended section 13 of the Act only refers to misuse of property and unjust enrichment as grounds for misconduct, which is assessed as disproportionate assets. Earlier section 13 accounted for general tendencies to seek bribe or indulge in corporate corrupt practices as grounds of misconduct. Sanction again, section 19 is something very important. What was related to sanction, there has been a huge shift taking in view various Supreme Court judgments, various judgments of various courts as well. Now this provides for protection of prior sanction by the government or competent authority to persons who have ceased to be public servants after bona fide discharge of their duty, so as to provide them safeguard from frivolous prosecution. Over the years, there has been various major changes in the definition of a public servant. A public servant, the definition has very wide term as defined under section 2, subsection C of the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. The Honorable Supreme Court recently in a landmark judgment, Mansukh Bhai, Kanji Bhai judgment, this is 2018 judgment, State of Gujarat, held deemed universities to be covered under the purview of definition of university under the Prevention of Corruption Act, thereby broadening the scope of what a public office is. In previous judgments, the Honorable Supreme Court had included MLAs, office bearers of private banks prior to merger with public banks, also in the ambit of public servant. Now to come to what is trap, and this is something which in PC Act you will be hearing time and again. Trap is laid down by CBI to catch the erring government official. There is a usual trap and there is something called unusual trap. The same are laid down to catch corrupt public officers, public servants who demand and take bribes. The process of catching such a corrupt public servant red-handed while they demand and take bribe is popularly known as trap. It is not a legal term. It is a creature of the processes created by CBI. It is something that has been devised by CBI to lay trap against the corrupt public servant. Collected uses of trap is placed before the court along with the charge sheet. It is quite important in securing conviction of public servants. So in most of the cases you will hear in PC Act are trap cases. The money for laying trap, and this is something which has been asked by a lot of young lawyers, the money for laying trap has to be provided by the complainant and not by anyone else. CBI does not provide you with that money. The same is important piece of evidence against the accused. It is to be used in the court during trial. Therefore, it is seized by CBI. It is put up in the court along with the remaining evidence in the charge sheet. After, of course, completion of trial, the court orders return of the money to the complainant. Now, as I said, there are various kinds of traps. There is something called conventional trap or usual trap, or unconventional trap or unusual trap. A conventional trap is a trap that is laid down by CBI upon a complaint being made that a public servant is demanding bribe. An unconventional trap, on the other hand, is a trap which is laid down by CBI where there is no complainant or complaint made that the public servant is demanding a bribe. We shall deal with them separately. But coming to conventional trap, a conventional trap is imperative where there is a complainant, that there is a public servant, that the public servant is demanding bribe or illegal gratification, and the same is for performance of an official duty, and the requirements of the trap are completed and concluded. In a conventional trap, CBI has to ensure the presence of two independent witnesses, which is a very common thing in CRPC, as you know, that in all cases, they would say that two independent witnesses have signed recovery memo, etc., etc. A trap laying officer, which is different. A shadow witness, again, which is unique, who shadows the complainant or the bribe giver. There may also be a use of audiovisual equipment and other forensic technology. The complainant, along with the shadow witness and two independent witnesses, goes to the predetermined spot where the trap has been laid down and where currency note is carried by them. The currency note is covered with a special powder. It is called phenol phthalate powder. There is something very unique about this powder. When the public officer accepts the powder covered notes, the complainant then signals to CBI. And let me just say very quickly that, CBI is not the only authority or the investigating organization in cases of corruption cases. ACB for state level also handles such matters. The investigating officer of CBI thereafter rushes to the spot where the hands of the accused are washed in water. The uniqueness of the powder is that the water would turn red upon contact, The accused is then taken into custody, a panchnama is prepared, and the investigation starts. The hand wash, the solution, the tape recording, if there is an audio video tape recording, usually there is also sent to the forensic expert. Therefore comes CFSL. The forensic expert report is taken on record, and the charge sheet is thereafter filed in court. Now, after this, just a second, please. After this, there is something called the concept of unconventional trap. The unconventional trap is a trap where there is no complainant. What happens is that CBI in certain cases would probably record or tap conversation of parties where it has source information or information that some bribe is being given, some illegal gratification is being exchanged. So the difficult part is there is no complainant, there is no complaint before CBI. How the tap is done is that it would take the permission of the Ministry of Home Affairs to request that the phone call may be recorded or tapped. In trap cases, it requires both the bribe giver and the bribe taker to be arrested. In cases of usual trap, this is not the case. The bribe giver is made a witness in the case, that is your star witness. Now, the government is the protector of public exchequer. The CBI's job in these cases is to protect the public exchequer. In these cases, the accused are liable under law to give their voice samples. It is a very interesting thing. There was a lot of arguments whether voice samples can be given, whether it is making a witness, accused may be a witness against himself or give evidence against himself. The Honorable Supreme Court has laid down that the accused is duty bound to give voice samples. It is not an infringement of his constitutional rights. Now, these are more difficult cases for the CBI, because it has to there is no complainant, there is no complaint, both the parties have been made and accused. So there is, as I said, no star witness. The witnesses, the evidence is mostly forensic in nature, and it usually links that statement on the recording with the movement of the file. And so the movement of the file becomes an integral part, the timeline becomes an integral part of the evidences so brought forth by the CBI. Now, the difficulty again is that the voice recordings can only be used for corroborative purposes. And therefore, the voice recordings, the timelines are created, and the timeline of the movement of the file is created, or the movement of money is seen. And in such cases, all of this is brought together to the court. Now, the accused can be, is of course arrested and punished under PC Act and also under IPC. As I've said that the bribe giver may also be punished in certain cases. The touts and middlemen, as I've also stated, can be punished under Section 8 and 9 of the Prevention of Corruption Act. The public servant is also punished under Section 10 of PC Act. Now, as I was saying that there is very quickly that there has been a lot of controversies and questions pertaining to the very existence of CBI. The Guwahati High Court has already given a judgment which is now stayed by the Honorable Supreme Court. The matter is there in the Honorable Supreme Court. There have been a lot of instances where the Honorable Supreme Court has delved into the issue of powers of CBI and the role of CBI. 1970, the Honorable Supreme Court had an occasion to examine the same in case of Management of Advance Insurance Company Limited matter. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court came to a conclusion that CBI was a police force not only for union territories, but also for other states. As I have stated, that we will go back to the Act. The Act has been amended, and therefore the various duties, responsibilities would be read in the light of the Act itself as so amended. In that judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court went on to specifically hold that CBI was entitled to conduct investigation under CRPC, which it still does, it being the General Act. The Madras High Court also came to a conclusion independently in the judgment of Muhammad Hussain, where it basically said that CBI will not have any power or jurisdiction in any state without the consent of the state government, which is what the Maharashtra government in Sushant Singh probably was also seeking to argue. With regard to requirement of consent under the DSP Act, it was found that a mere letter was sufficient to confer jurisdiction on CBI to investigate offenses in the state, and there was no particular form for grant or denial of such consent. As I said, you can take it as a general power of attorney given by the state to the center to investigate matters, and this is what is being done. Now, coming back, as I've stated that Section 7A and Section 8 in the amended 2018 Act, in the earlier Act, the private individuals could not be prosecuted under the PC Act. By way of this amendment, by incorporation of Section 7A and Section 8, they have offenses have been introduced, prosecution has been introduced against private individuals. For prosecuting under this section, it is immaterial whether the public servant has been influenced or not. So you don't have to go that far in such a case. All you have to say is that such and such person was giving bribe or seeking to give bribe and bring that evidence. So there is a gray area which requires consideration, is where a private individual is being prosecuted and the investigating officer is unable to identify who that particular public servant was. So imagine there is a person who's licensing and say that he can get something done in a particular department, and that private individual gives bribe and is caught, but you do not know the name of that particular officer. And that is the gray area that requires consideration of the Honorable Supreme Court. As to reiterate Section 9 and 10, earlier there were neither any offenses defined nor any provisions existed for prosecuting corporate houses. In this Act, the commercial organizations have been brought in, and these commercial organizations, as I've already stated, under Section 9 subsection 3A, also include partnership firms, association of persons, and companies. Section 13 is of vital importance, which is criminal misconduct by public servant. This was a very wide section, and it has now been narrowed down and structured much better. As it stood before the amendment, it was very, very elaborate. Large number of cases were registered and investigated against government officials under Section 1D. Now, because the courts were flooded, I think it is better that now it has been more crystallized, more cemented, and therefore there would be lesser cases filed, but much stronger cases filed. Now, there is, again, as I said, what is the fate of those cases that are being tried pre-amended? And as I have already stated, that I think there is no protective clause, and therefore it should be now tried under the new section. But as I said, that probably this is a myopic view of a defense attorney. Section 13, again, pursuant the division bench. Now, why there is an amendment is also very interesting. Delhi High Court division bench in 2011 laid down that even in cases where public servant is not acting dishonestly and there is no mens rea, and which goes against the fabric of what CRPC is, where there is no mens rea proof, but the action of the public servant is somehow contrary to public interest, then also public servant can be convicted under Section 13. This was the famous Sukram case, where basic issue was that there were certain public servants who did certain acts which may either be negligent or non-application of mind, or even otherwise in routine, which benefited certain politicians and certain other people. The question was, when they did not know that their act is benefiting somebody else, will they or can they still be punished? The division bench had come to a conclusion, yes, which threatened the very fabric of how the administration, the IAS officers or public servants are going to work, because they would always be scared of a sword hanging on their neck. And therefore this 2018 amendment protects these bona fide acts on part of the government servants. Also, the offenses have now been narrowed down under new section of Section 13. It is said to be committed only when the public servant misappropriates something that belongs to the government and is entrusted to him, or illicitly enriches himself or herself. In the light of this, a very important, but there's another question that has come. What would be the fate of those cases which were being argued prior to the amendment? That is something that we'll meet again and again. Now also, as I said, that there is no saving clause. So therefore, as I said, my myopic view, which is there, but there are certain very important judgments which actually talk about saving clauses and what would happen when there is no saving clause. One, which is my personal favorite, is Sundarlal versus Municipal Corporation of Delhi, citation 1970, SCC Online Delhi 93. And another one which I have referred quite a bit is Ratanlal versus State of Punjab, 1964, volume 7, SCR 676. There are also judgments on saving clauses. One of them, which is of great importance, is General Finance Company versus CIT, which is 2002, volume 7, SCC 1. Which actually talks about what is saving clause and how does it affect the statute, the sections, etc., etc. Section 7, as I've said, to prosecute any public servant for offense of bribery under Section 7, it is sine qua non to prove that he or she had made a demand. In other words, without proof of demand, there can be no conviction under Section 7. So there are two demands. One is a demand prior to a person filing a complaint, where a person says that money has been demanded for doing something. And second is an active demand, which is done when the trap is laid down. Now this check has been put in so that no false cases can be created. So therefore there has to be a demand during the trap as well. And upon that clear demand, a sign will be given and the arrest will take place. This also protects public servants on which probably bribe money is being forced upon by some trick, by a dubious complainant. There are certain very important judgments. One is very important, which is a 2016 judgment, which is Sejappa versus State, 2016, volume 12, SCC, page 150, where the Honorable Court in para 19/2021 has held to the effect that mere receipt of amount by an accused is not sufficient to fasten the guilt in absence of evidence with regard to demand and acceptance. So demand and acceptance are two pillars that we should be aware of. Demand and acceptance of the amount as illegal gratification. So therefore, there are two kinds of demands, and on the subsequent demand, there has to be an acceptance. As I said, that the solution will only turn red if the accused has touched the notes. He will only touch the note if he has accepted the bribe money. There is also a judgment that I would like you to note down. It is State of Kerala versus CP Rao. It is a 2011 judgment, 2011 volume 6, SCC 450, important paragraph 10. The ratio as held is in absence of any witness to prove payment of bribe or to show that the accused voluntarily accepted the money, knowing it to be bribe, conviction cannot be sustained. So in these cases, a lot of times, as I said, forensic evidence, scientific evidence, evidence which of the nature of audio video recording is of paramount importance, not only for CBI, for prosecution, but at times also for the defense, for the accused himself. Now, section 13, as we said, the prosecution has to show that the public servant was acting with dishonest intention. Mens rea, therefore, is of importance here. There are a number of cases where, as I said, including the Sukhram judgment, where it so came that the public servant had acted negligently, had acted rashly, had acted in haste, but there was no mens rea, there was no dishonest intention. He did not know the conspiracy, and therefore he could not be made a part of the conspiracy, and therefore could not be prosecuted or punished under section 13 of CRPC. There is...
Can conclude, sir.
I can conclude. All right, Ji. Just to say very quickly, section 20 is presumption of guilt against the public servant unless the contrary is proven by him or her. So the burden of proof in these cases shifts substantially upon the accused, which is the uniqueness of these cases. In the end, I would just like to say two things. One, of course, when we were meeting sanction, previous sanction is necessary for prosecution. By this amendment, it is applicable only to serving officials and not officials who have retired. This protection is provided by statute to public servants, whereby the court has been prohibited to take cognizance of an offence against a public servant without taking prior sanction of concerned authorities. sanction was a double-edged sword till now. There were various judgments on both sides. And therefore, this is something that has been met and clarified by this amendment. On being a lawyer, practicing on the criminal side, especially a litigation lawyer, a criminal lawyer, or a constitutional lawyer, my belief is that you're the last bastion of democracy. I honestly believe that you're the protector of the realm, so to say. For all those Game of Thrones fans, you are the night guards. A question is usually asked, especially when you're young, why did you become a lawyer? And there is something which was asked to me yesterday, and so I was thinking about it. And because I honestly believe that being a lawyer is a thankless job. And when somebody says that you're in there for the money, I think it is completely wrong. In fact, if you believe that you yourself are in it for the money, you're absolutely wrong. There are various easier ways of making money. Much less stressful ways of making money. Some do it for the high of winning. Like me, I love the thrill of arguing and getting relief in courts and bail matters and discharge matters. But some of us do it for a higher purpose. It is to protect democracy. It is to protect liberty and to protect humanity. And if you aspire for this higher purpose, everything else will follow automatically. I hope you've been able to have some takeaway from this. I really, really thank all of you for listening and tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I welcome Honorable Mr. Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, former Chief Justice of India. Thank you, sir, for your taking out time for us from your busy schedule. I invite you, sir, to have concluding remarks.
So, Mr. Rajendrapal, should I talk on the subject for
Yes,
how much time I can?
Sure, sir.
You have all the time, my lords. Please don't say that.
No. This is.
We want to listen to you, sir. We want to listen.
Mr. Because subject is CBI investigation and trial proceedings. So, Mr. Kapil Sankla, Mr. Malhotra, and Mr. Rajendrapal and his colleagues, very happy to join with you because this is the period of web seminars. So, Mr. Sankla has very extensively dealt with the PC Act, how the nuances of the PC Act, because most of the cases are dealt with by the Delhi Special Police is by these offense under PC Act. But they are also dealing with other in courts. There is a serious demand for CBI inquiry. All matters, murder case, even theft case, even serious offences. Offences involve some important personalities. They say that the CBI should investigate the case. So they are in high demand. They have got a better credibility than other investigating agencies. So CBI, just as any other agencies, CBI also takes into consideration various provisions and start investigation. The moment the FIR is registered in the section 154, then they start investigation. The first step, as any investigating agency, is to record 161 statement. That 161 statement is the crucial thing, and every lawyer, I feel that these are all aspirant lawyers, young students, they are all listening to this. They must know what is the 161 statement as a criminal lawyer. And the purpose of 161 statement is given not in 161, it is 162. How this statement, 161 statement could be used in a trial. And any lawyer who is on the criminal side, they are furnished with all the documents at the initial stage itself. And 161 statement all the witnesses who are proposed to be examined the case would be given. They must closely read the 161 statement. It is not a signed statement. It is not the evidentiary value of 161 statement is practically nil, though even some judges misunderstand that is 161 statement is admissible in evidence. It is not admissible in evidence. It is only a previous statement, but as a lawyer, he can use the 161 statement as provided under 162. And as a previous statement made by the witnesses, it is an unsigned statement. Unlike the FIR, FIR is a signed statement. FIR has got a evidentiary value as the first statement as regards the incident, but 161 statement has no such sanctity. It is an unsigned statement. But the previous statement, with regard to the previous statement, the witness could be closely cross-examined. They cross-examine, and any contradiction made by the lawyer, criminal lawyer, who is appearing for the accuser, it has got the very important evidentiary value. If it is a contradiction, and important, which the witness ought to have stated before in 161 statement, is also deemed to be a contradiction. On that aspect also, it could be a cross-examined. So the 162, one should closely read 162 statement, and they approach the witness and the purpose of cross-examination. I must also say the purpose of cross-examination. Many young lawyers, you intend to be the criminal lawyer. They must know the purpose of cross-examination. Some lawyers start cross-examination for hours and hours together, but that is the purpose of cross-examination is to shatter the evidence that has been given by the witness in chief examination. If he has given any evidence, try to smash that evidence, create a serious doubt in the mind of the judge that what he had stated is wrong. He could not have been present there. What he stated is wrong, and if that doubt is created, and it must be cross-examination should be very, very cleverly used. If a unnecessary question will create serious problem for the accused in a criminal case, he should not venture to put any unnecessary question to the witness. He should be very, very careful in the cross-examination. He should make use of this 161 statement and cross-examine him with regard to 160, making of 162 statement. That is how some amendment has been made in the 161 statement also. When I do not think that it is to be the 154 also certain amendments after the post-Nirphaya incident, the amendment, if the offence is relating to 354A, 354B, 376A, B, C, D, and 326A, that is the throwing of acid on the face, on the body, and 326A, B, all these offences are reported, and it is to be recorded, and there are certain new offences have been created in the Indian Penal Code, 160A, that if the officer who is bound to record 154 is not recording the statement, he is liable for prosecution, and a minimal sentence is prescribed for him. And the witnesses are also not to be called at odd hours, and if the witness is less than 15 years or witness is above 65 years, he shall be considered at a place of his choice, or the police. All these amendments various amendments have been made in the CRPC after I think 3/12/2013, that amendment has come into effect. So the criminal prosecution, the lawyers should be extremely careful and should closely read all the evidence that is furnished to him in the court. Then he also the trial, he should also court. From the point of view of court, there are certain provisions which is how the charges are framed, how they check, what are the charges to be clubbed, what is, suppose if there is a criminal complaint, is a complaint and a police charge case, what are the steps to be taken by the magistrate if there is a criminal complaint and in the course of the trial it comes to know there is already a complaint and the investigation is in progress, the magistrate should stay the proceedings and both the cases should club together and they should proceed as if it is a police registered case. All these provisions, the Criminal Procedure Code, once one who is practicing in the criminal side should closely watch these provisions, understand these provisions. Otherwise, not only sometimes I have what is a bailable offence, non-bailable offence, what is cognizance, what is the cognizable offence, what conditions persons could be arrested, what are the procedure to be followed, after the arrest, how the arrest is affected. These are all dealt with in detail in the CRPC. So these provisions one should read closely, understand it, and then only he can be a good criminal lawyer. So in the courses, so normally the judges who are working as magistrate, judicial first class magistrate or session judges, some of the provisions they have to be very, very careful. Under a person in the course of the trial or inquiry, a person is alleged, a person who is not under trial the court feels that the court finds that he has committed the offence, he is not charged before him, then he could be implicated. That provision also is very important. Under what, in the course of death, there should be evidence against him. But sometimes very casually these provisions are, somebody files an application and then immediately he is implicated as an accused. So such things also do happen in the criminal cases. These are all the magistrates, the judicial magistrate first class, and the session judges also do commit serious mistakes in some of the provisions. The trial is a serious the thing. You should provide opportunity. Now the various provisions, the victimology is there, the compensation 360 is to be, how the 360 is to be invoked, where the Probation of Offenders Act is to be in, and the plea bargaining, under what circumstance the plea bargaining could be used. This is a new provision, which is, I don't know whether, as I am not very much conversant with the day-to-day, the happenings in the criminal cases, whether plea bargaining people are, the accused are availing the benefit of plea bargaining. If it is not an offence coming under the death penalty, the punishment is not death penalty, life imprisonment, or the less than 7 years, not more than 7 years, if these three offences are excluded. So the rest, the accused can voluntarily make a opt for plea bargaining. Notice should be given to the victim, notice should be given to the prosecutor. Then the court can consider and come a sort of mediation, come to a settlement. And the accused could be given, and for the appropriate punishment, he should be let on probation, or he should be 1/4 of the punishment. It's a very benevolent provision. I don't know to what extent in United States, that is, the plea bargaining is a large number of cases it is being used. In India, I don't think that because if the accused has got a feeling that he is likely to be acquitted at the end of the trial, then why should he go for these plea bargaining? But the rights of the accused are to a great extent protected under the plea bargaining portion. That is also to be used. And the sessions trial, any trial, whether CBI trial or any other trial, the same procedure. The accused should be given, the charge should be read out to him, and whether he is accept the plea guilty or not guilty. If he pleads guilty, then of course there not be trial. He is not pleading guilty, then he should be tried. The witnesses should be examined. The examination should be in the presence of the accused. Then he should be he could be questioned by the court. He should be in that is also a given opportunity. Now I think the new CRPC, the accused can give a written submission also to in the matter. So in the various some amendments have been made to that effect. So the trial proceedings, the rights of the victim are protected, rights of the accused are protected. All the laws are basically complying with the natural principles of natural justice and given opportunity to defend properly. But that is why the problem is, I don't know what will happen after this pandemic period is over. The large number of cases are going to be pending in various courts. What are we going to do with these cases? And if a trial in accordance with the strict provisions of the CRPC is followed, all these provisions are strictly complied, and naturally the judges are bound to comply with these provisions. Of course, the adjournment, some of the cases, the adjournment is strictly prohibited. Some cases that these 354, 376A to E and 378, 509 and all to be completed within 2 months. It is very easy to make legislation. One must know the ground reality of the courts in this country. 2,000, 4,000 cases are pending in a court. What the judge can do? 30, 40 cases are pending in on a day. And if a roll call itself will take more than 1 hour, then the finest hours in the morning, that is given for this roll call and preliminary hearing. So the rest alone is useful. And how many witnesses could be examined? And if the witnesses examination and some amendments have been made in the CPC, that has given very, because the chief examination could be in the form of the affidavit. Now the affidavit running to 60 pages, 70 pages. Chief examination could have been could have been finished within 10 or 15 minutes. Now the affidavit is 40 pages. What is to be done? The cross-examiner will have to touch all the 40, whatever stated in the, otherwise it is admissible. The law is that the one who is not challenging whatever stated in the affidavit is amounts to admission. So the CRPC, one who is practicing on the CRPC must closely read the CRPC, Evidence Act, and the Penal Code, various provisions of the Penal Code and the nuance of the various provisions, every section. Initially, one may not understand what is what or the first reading. Read. Then you will understand it is not that easy to be a good criminal lawyer. Hours of the tiresome work is required to become a good criminal lawyer. And that too, he should perform well in the court. That is also a basic thing. So the CBI investigation is just like any other investigation. But my experience is the CBI investigation, they examine large number of witnesses. So that is one CBI should get the whatever cases they don't leave any witness. They examine all the witnesses. Takes time. And when I was holding charge of the Chief Justice, the director of CBI came and he said there is only 15, 20 years old cases are pending in the CBI court. So then I said, it is a very sad situation. So then I made a request that it is not only one court in each state that is required, at least we should have 60, 70 courts, CBI courts should be, especially because the CBI courts alone are competent to conduct the trial of cases which are investigated by the CBI. So thereafter, then Prime Minister was kind enough to take initiative. Some 50, 60 new codes were established. So that is why. But now, even that 60 codes are also not sufficient to cater to the needs of the accused or the. There may be some old cases, more than 10-year-old cases, but certainly be in there. Ms. Sakla would be able to know that how the pendency is, how much pendency is in even the Delhi CBI courts and all. We should at least in every metropolitan city there should be CBI court. That should be the ideal situation. Then only we would be. But the trial investigation, their investigation, they consider their credibility. They are able to maintain the credibility of the investigation. They are sought after people. So they have got well-trained people in the investigation is a very, very serious thing. It should be very cleverly or at the right moment. We should do the right thing. Otherwise, everything will escape notice of the authorities, and we will not get the proper evidence, and we will not be able to see that the accused is one, and that is one thing. Of course, the trial is any other case. Trial is, and CBI special judges are mostly they are senior session judges. In all the states, CBI judges are senior special judges are there. So they know the procedure. They would be only thing that they must devote more attention and should act quickly. They should speed up the trial procedure. Then only it would be we would be able to complete we do justice to we should do justice to the state, justice to the accused, justice to sometimes the victim, and most of the cases are as Mr. Sakla pointed out, under the PC Act, defalcation of or any other case or the bank, cooperative societies, or these days, and voluminous documents are there. So in most of the cases, that is one thing because it is very not by a simple murder case. It requires the proof of every item of evidence. So it is difficult. So the CBI cases are by and large it's difficult, and they have got special counsel and commission prosecutors are there. They should also enhance the quality of their prosecutors and include more and more very talented young lawyers in their team take and complete the trial. Anyway, it is you have chosen this subject, and I am happy that I could talk about the CBI and the investigation. Then the investigation, we can have so many. Even one provision is we can talk for 1 hour. So this is only just going around beating about the bush about various provisions of trial. So it is only just pointing out these facts. It is very difficult to talk on the trial of CBI cases. So, Mr. I hope this is sufficient for your purpose.
Thank you, sir. With your permission, can we take 2 or 3 questions as we have short of time?
Of course.
Sir, one question is from Ms. Latika. Once the charge sheet is filled in the court by police without completing investigation, just to help accused, how can a complaint ask court for reinvestigation after charge sheet is filled?
If it is a genuine complaint, she can file a petition under section 173 of the CRPC for a reinvestigation of the case. But it is not that easy. The court should, you see, in the process of investigation, they examine large number of witnesses. They may be citing as 10 or 11 witnesses, but they may be questioning sometimes 80, 70 witnesses. And culling out all these materials, they find this so and so. Investigation is. So the outer periphery, you may see that it was not properly investigated. They must have investigated. And the court, unless very strong case is there, normally the court does not allow the re-investigation of the case unless serious injustice is caused to the parties. Then only the re-investigation is allowed.
Right.
Of course, there is a remedy. That is the petitioner or section 170.
Sir, there is a question for Sankla sir. What if a FIR is registered and the concerned police station or IO not giving FIR copy to the accused or his family? What should a person do in such situation?
As in the beginning of the webinar, I had pointed out that this is an unfortunate situation. That despite the Honorable Supreme Court in plethora of judgments saying that this is the constitutional right of the accused, and that not supplying of FIR would be a contempt of the court, it is regularly seen that in many matters the police is still not giving copies of the FIR, especially in heinous offences or where the accused is already in custody or matters which are in limelight. And I said that, at the time when you have to apply for bail, then a defense lawyer would do everything possible to get a copy of the FIR, which kind of endorses corruption. And therefore, it is my genuine hope that once this situation is brought to the notice of the trial court, which is regularly brought before the trial court, the trial courts may be more open to taking these erring police officers to task. Our endeavor always is to move an application to the court and bring that fact before the notice of the court, even when we are moving a bail application, saying that the bail application is without the copy of the FIR as has not been supplied by the IO/police. Unfortunately, no action is taken against them. And as I said, that the Honorable Supreme Court has been very consistent in its view. And I really hope that the trial courts actually take some action against such police officers so that that corruption and that kind of high-handed arbitrariness is removed from the prosecutorial system. Move an application, that is something that we do.
Sir, there is a question for P.K. Malhotra, sir. Is there any time limit for CBI to conclude their investigation?
Well, for conclusion of investigation, no timelines are prescribed under the law, but yes, there are internal mechanisms to control all these things. And depending on the severity of the case, how serious the offense is, there are different layers at which the cases are properly monitored by the CBI. And obviously the CBI's working is monitored, as Mr. Sankla in his presentation has also said, by the CVC also. So there are internal control and mechanism prescribed in the processes laid down under various administrative guidelines. And I think there are sufficient checks and balances which is done. But yes, there are issues and there have been instances where the investigations have been delayed and which becomes a cause of concern because either the culprit goes scot-free because of non-availability of evidence and the delays which are taking place, or maybe in genuine cases, the punishment is not given on time. I think these problems we are facing, but I think systems are ever improving. New guidelines are coming. New things are coming into place. As Mr. Sankla also pointed out, law has been amended many times, and all these amendments are for proper delivery of justice. As Honorable Chief Justice has also pointed out, ultimate aim of our law is to provide justice to the common man. And in that direction, steps are taken from time to time, either by amending the law or by issuing administrative instructions from time to time.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question for Sankla, sir. When some crime is encountered by the police officers, like SSR's case, Sushant Singh case, why the investigating officers are not called immediately for the investigation?
Unfortunately, I really don't understand the question. What do you mean by the investigating officers are not called? You see, let me give a very general overview of what I understand, sir. Once a crime comes to the knowledge of any person, he is duty bound to report the same to the police. Same way, the police, the other side of the coin is movement and information reaches the police of a crime having been committed, they have to note it down. Now, in case of a cognizable offense, it has to be noted down and converted into an FIR. Otherwise, it will be converted into a report and sent to the magistrate. So in such case of SSR case, there has been a serious lapse by the police in not registering the FIR. And as I said, the Honorable Supreme Court consistently in various cases has said that you will, a moment you get to know that an offense has taken place, you will register an FIR. If you do not, again, the Honorable Supreme Court has said this would be serious dereliction of duty. Action will be taken against such officers. Unfortunately, no action is taken. What the police usually does is claims that they are not investigating the matter and only inquiring the matter, which is otherwise illegal because CRPC, as I've already said, gives no protection to inquiry, except in suicide cases, which is a parallel proceeding of inquest that runs parallel to registering of FIR and investigation in terms of section 156 CRPC.
There is one question for my lordship. This is last question. Sir, can central government can take suo moto up a criminal matter which is closed by a state government and hand that over to CBI?
What happened to the case?
Can central government suo moto take up a criminal matter which is closed by the state government and hand over to the CBI?
Close in the investigation stopped.
Yes, sir.
First of all, state has no power to close the investigation. So it is a criminal proceeding. Once it has reached, then it should have culmination in the court itself. State can only withdraw the criminal cases. They can file an application to withdraw the criminal case. That also is not that easy. They should give very reasons, good reasons for withdrawing the case to prevent enmity between the groups, for public justice and all. So wider, the state can withdraw it. Once the case reaches the court, the state cannot stop the investigation or do any case. Once it is withdrawn, then there is no question of the central government. Probably once in doing the process of investigation, whether a case registered in the state, whether it was taken over by the CBI, that may be the question. That central government if it is involved some important matter affecting the state, the NIA could take over the matter and all. It is the larger the integrity of the country or outside agency or involvement of other states, or then the NIA can be involved, and that could be done by the central government.
Thank you, my lordship. The participants can send their questions to La Joint email because there is a short of time. So we will conclude this webinar, and you can post your questions to our email. So we will post to Sankla sir and to P.K. Malhotra sir and to Honorable Justice sir for to whom you want to ask the questions. I extremely thank to Honorable Mr. Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, former Chief Justice of India, for sparing time from his busy schedule for this webinar. I am thankful to P.K. Malhotra sir, who has also given us time from his busy schedule for this webinar. We are also thankful to Kapil Sankla sir. On Sunday, we have taken his time for this time. We have taken this time for this webinar. So we are thankful to you. And we think that more and more webinars we'll do with you, sir. And thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Malhotra sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.